So today we're going to play some Modern. Standard's getting to be about the time where, it's kind of boring. Things are winding down. There aren't a lot of big tournaments and stuff. And metagame's not really going to get shaken up all that much. Format's kind of figured out. And the new set's about to come out. So I thought I would play basically a format that doesn't do a lot of changing all that much. And Modern is very, very healthy right now. And I've done a lot of content with Jeskai and Gerry, but I haven't done a video, so I thought that would be pretty nice. So far, I've played this in the Mox and GP Charlotte, and I think that's it. But both those tournaments went pretty well. I ended up 12-3 at GP Charlotte, and that's really good to me, both because my Modern record is historically not great, at least I think so, and the deck is basically just brand new, Ancestral got unbanned, Eldrazi died, effectively. Nahiri got printed, which gives the deck a nice clean answer, or a nice clean win condition. Basically play this. I consider this like a 3-turn thing, because you need to play Nahiri, and then plus it over 2 turns, and then untap. So it's like basically 2 or 3 turns, depending on how you want to look at it, but it kills them. And it's not just this thing that's like, it's kind of like Ancestral, where just like it sits there and then hopefully you can like leverage that into a win. So Ancestral is like a virtual kill, but like Nahiri is just like an actual kill, and it also just does other stuff. So you can filter through your like semi-dead cards. Maybe you have removal spells. They're playing a control deck. You can just filter through those. If you get their board down to like a single Tarmogoyf, you can play Nahiri, kill their Tarmogoyf, which is huge. And you get to play with Emrakul, which is pretty sweet. I will note that having an Emrakul in your deck is certainly not ideal, because drawing this thing naturally is not great, and that has happened to me a lot. But at the same time, my win percentage with this deck is quite high. Team MGG put 2 people in top 8, I think 1 in top 4, 1 in top 8 of last weekend's SCG Dallas, and they're both playing Nahiri, or 2 of the 4 that made it, I guess, were playing Nahiri. And yeah, like Sean McLaren was talking about cutting the Emrakul, those guys still played the Emrakul. Personally, I have won a lot of games that could not have been won otherwise with the Emrakul. So I feel like if you play this deck and you play the Nahiris and you don't play the Emrakul, you're going to have a tough time. Obviously, you can build your deck a little bit differently. You could have more like Electrolyzes, Cryptic Command, stuff like that, and then, maybe you get ahead on cards, and you're not so focused on just like playing Nahiri and protecting it like this deck is built to do. But I don't really like that plan. I like just having this 4-mana Planeswalker that can actually win me the game, even if, you +2 it twice, and then you search for a Snapcaster Mage. Like, that's kind of like a virtual kill, but there are combo decks in the format where, like, you actually just need to kill a bunch of the permanents, and, like, that's the only way that you're going to be able to beat them. Like, filtering through some cards and getting a Snapcaster Mage is not going to do it, but yeah. Deck basically relies on Nahiri. That is the main win condition. You can certainly win games with Snapcaster Mage, Lightning Bolt, and Celestial Colonnade, but I've mostly minimized those cards in the deck. There are only 2 Colonnades. There aren't things like Lightning Helix. I think Lightning Helix is a fine card. You can see it in the sideboard over here, but it is not efficient. It is 2 mana. It doesn't kill Tarmogoyf. There are certainly some decks where Helix is the best card against them, like Burn Zoo. But 2 mana is fairly inefficient for what we're trying to do. But Helix does double as additional Lightning Bolts that you can use to actually kill people, which the old Jeskai decks did. But I am not interested in that game plan. I feel like Ancestral and Nahiri are the actual things that you should be building around, not like Colonnade and Snapcaster. So, basically want to be able to find Nahiri. We have Serum Visions. With Serum Visions, we have a low land count. We only have 23 land. And because we only have 23 land, I'm only playing 2 Colonnades, because if I have like a 1-land hand with Serum Visions that I want to keep on the draw, I don't want my 1 land to be a Colonnade. If I'm keeping a 2-land hand, I don't want my lands to be Colonnades or, Colonnade Sulphur Falls or something. Like, I want to be able to use my mana every turn. I want to do a lot of things in the first 3 turns, because I feel like Modern is about that. Like, that is just Modern in a nutshell. Is like, how many things can you do to interact with your opponent or try and kill your opponent in the first 3 turns? And since we can't kill our opponents, we have to interact. And we need some manas. We can't just play like these tap lands and just be fine with our lives, So I like keeping the Colonnades to a minimum. It's also just very rare that you're like, oh man, it's time to start attacking with Colonnade, and then they kill it, and you're just like, oh, I'm out, you know? Back in the old standard days, it was like, oh, well, I'm going to attack you with this Colonnade until you kill it, and then I'm going to start activating my other Colonnade, and then you're eventually going to die to this one because now you're out of removal, but that happens very rarely in Modern because people don't have a ton of removal spells, and especially against this deck, post-board, they're not going to keep in a ton of removal spells. So the first Colonnade is very, very large. It dodges Lightning Bolt. It's not like Creeping Tar Pit in that way, where having multiple Tar Pits is actually good, and it is also just a huge investment, like 5 mana plus basically your Colonnade. You know, it's like effectively 6 mana to attack them for 4. Obviously, it has Vigilance, and you can still use it to play a 1 mana spell or whatever, you know. But like 6 effective mana is a lot. So yeah, want to keep those to a minimum. I like having a bunch of cheap stuff. Path to Exile, Lightning Bolt, best removal spells in Modern, hands down. I don't think that's particularly close. I have 4 Snapcaster Mages to rebuy the Paths and the Bolts. And potentially the Serum Visions. And I have 9 counter spells in Remand, Mana Leak, and Spell Snare. And initially I started with 4 Remands, just because this deck was all about velocity and just kind of like keeping your opponent off tempo, but not necessarily, you know, trading one for one with their cards. Like, you're not very interested in actually doing that. You just want to be able to play Nahiri, plus it, and untap. Like, that is kind of the goal. And once you're able to do that, you can generally deal with enough of their stuff that you can actually ult the Nahiri and find Emrakul. So, Remand is pretty good. Only issue is, the way Modern is right now, there's a lot of, like, Infect and Zoo and Burn and stuff. And cards like Remand are not very good. On the other hand, Mana Leak, not that bad. Mana Leak is a card that is a little bit more effective just because against things like Burn and Tron, like, you want to counter their Karn. You want them to not have Karn anymore. You want them to not have Lava Spike or Boros Charm or whatever it is anymore. So Mana Leak is kind of the concession to that. Mana Leak is kind of odd in that this deck can play long games, so Leak certainly goes dead kind of quickly. You are pathing your opponent, which gives them extra mana, so they can potentially pay for your Mana Leak. And Mana Leak is not necessarily what this deck wants to be doing, but Mana Leak is a better counterspell against a lot of decks in Modern, so I have enjoyed having a mix. Pete Ingram and Jim Davis played 6 total 2-mana counterspells. Previously I had 4, and then I had 5. But I'm going to try the 6 today. I'm not sold that this third Mana Leak should actually be in the deck, but if there are a lot of decks where you actually need the hard counter, like basically a lot of combo decks, and I kind of consider Burn to be like a spell-based combo deck, then Mana Leak is pretty nice. 3 Spell Snare is a lot. Generally, blue decks in Modern only play 2, but because I think that this deck is so focused on keeping the board clear, and especially with Ancestral Vision, you want a lot of cheap answers. I do feel like Spell Snare is just one of the best cards that you could be playing, and yes, there are going to be times when it is dead, it is in your hand, it's not doing anything. Your opponent either had like a 2-mana spell that they already played before you had your Spell Snare, or like maybe you tapped out to suspend Ancestral or something, and they don't have any 2-mana cards, but at the same time, you also have Nahiri to filter through a lot of these pseudo-dead cards, and also, like, just Spell Snare is live. It is live a lot of the time. It is also basically one of the best cards against other blue decks because of Snapcaster Mage and the amount of 2-mana counterspells that people play in the format. So I think Spell Snare is very, very good. I think whether or not you play 2 or 3 in a normal blue deck is very close. But in this deck, I think it is an automatic 3. And I know people like AJ Soccer played 4 in GPLA. And he said it was the best card in the deck. And like, that also does not seem that crazy to me, just because of what this deck is trying to do. So, again, just based on how this deck operates, like, you could build it in such a way where you actually just want to deal with all of your opponent's stuff, kill all their cards, play Electrolyze, Cryptic Commands, Mana Leaks, don't play Remand and stuff like that. But I like this build of the deck a little bit better, especially since when you are building your deck in such a way where you are just trying to protect Nahiri, you get to play stuff like Anger of the Gods and Timely Reinforcements. And in a normal Jeskai deck, you might not be able to do this because you're playing for the long game, and that means you're going to have like 26 lands, like a very, very high land count because you want to make all your land drops. This deck is more velocity based. It's relying on Serum Visions and Remand to hit its land drops. and also is not all that interested in getting to 6 mana, whereas previous Jeskai decks are. So, like, you're going to have fewer lands overall, just fewer mana sources, so you can afford to draw, like, the occasional spell that is going to be pseudo-dead. So, like, the Spell Snare, the Timely, the Angers all fit in that category, also Emrakul. But you have the added bonus of actually just being able to pitch them to Nahiri at certain points. So I like the fact that you get to play like these high-risk, high-reward cards, and Timely Reinforcements is just a phenomenal card. I think it is likely the most underrated card in Modern, especially right now. And it's not like, oh, I'm playing Timely just for burn. It's like, no, I'm playing Timely more for, like, Tarmogoyf. Like, Tarmogoyf does not match up well against this card if you have other things going on. Like, you gain the 6 life, you end up at, 23 or something. And then you have 3 tokens that can just chump their Tarmogoyf for multiple turns. And as long as you're building towards something bigger, like, that's going to buy you a lot of time. Also, Liliana the Veil is one of the best cards against this deck. And, like, if they go, like, 2-drop creature into Liliana and you play Timely, like, you're still a pretty reasonable favorite, just because, like, you can untap, kill their creature, attack their Liliana, maybe they block one of your tokens, whatever. I have Lightning Bolt to finish off your Liliana, and it adds this extra dimension to your deck that you didn't previously have, and also, just 6 life is way more than 3 life, so you play against Burn, and drawing your Timely Reinforcements is going to do way more work for you than drawing a single Lightning Helix would, even though it is kind of more likely that you are going to be able to Snapcaster Mage Lightning Helix for value than you would just because Snapcaster Mage on Timely costs 5 mana. But I think Timely is a much, 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 much better card than Lightning Helix in these sorts of decks, at least the way I have my deck constructed. Obviously, if you're going to cut the Serum Visions, basically add 3 lands and another spell, you probably have to retool the deck completely. And that's okay. That's another way to go about things, and that's fine. But for how I built my deck, I think Timely is one of the key cards and is basically what makes the deck be able to be built this way. On the flip side, Anger of the Gods is just kind of like a concession to where the format is now with various collected company decks and stuff. I have not seen a ton of Tarmogoyfs. I used to have relics in my sideboard to be able to combo with my Angers and Lightning Bolts to take out a Tarmogoyf, and I'm kind of being a little risky by including these Angers instead of things like Wrath of God. But I like having the 3 mana sweeper. A lot of the time, to get around spot removal, Infect will just kind of dump their hand. They'll play out, their Noble, their Glistener Elf, their Blighted Agent, and hope to just like nickel and dime you out. And Anger actually ends up being quite good against those types of draws. It could also be good against Affinity, certainly very good against Zoo, great against the Abzan Company decks. So I've liked the Angers a lot. I have not liked Wrath of God just because I really appreciate how this deck doesn't actually need to get double white mana at any real point. Like, basically the only thing that you're going to need double white for is when you already have a Colonnade, and then you need another white source. So yeah, it allows me to play Sulphur Falls. This could also be a Cascade Bluffs, but I like Sulphur Falls a little bit better, especially since I don't have Cryptic Command anymore. And yeah, I don't know. Sulphur Falls is nice. Like, basically, you have enough slots for... you want your Strands and your Tarns. You want 2 of your primary duels and 1 of your secondaries. So, like, 1 Sacred Foundry, 1 Hollowed Fountain, 1 Mountain, 1 Plains. 2 Island is pretty normal, but with all the Snares, Serum Visions, and Ancestrals, I actually like having the 3rd Island. And then, usually, I'll play, like, another fetch land that is one of the secondary colors, in this case Arid Mesa, which can get either Mountain or Plains. Like, obviously you could play like a Misty Rainforest or whatever, but I think it's more likely you would rather have a fetch land that can find either Mountain or Plains, and Mesa does both. So I like having the 1 copy of Arid Mesa. I have the 2 Colonnades, as I mentioned. I feel like you get to play a couple creature lands just sort of as a free roll, and then from there you still have a few slots in your mana base. So if I had Geist of St. Traft in my sideboard, I could play a Cavern of Souls main deck. I think that's perfectly reasonable. I do think this deck can support 1 colorless land as a complete free roll, and for that I've chosen Ghost Quarter. It could be Cavern of Souls, it could be Desolate Lighthouse, but I like Ghost Quarter more as a thing to fight Inkmoth Nexus and just other creature lands, basically. Like, you get to play Nahiri, have Ghost Quarter up against the Raging Ravine or whatever Colonnade, and it's so much easier to defend Nahiri at that point. So I really like having the Ghost Quarter. And then the additional lands that are not like the fetch dual creature land, utility land, are just Sulphur Falls to help cast Anger of the Gods and basically to just having a nod to like needing multiple red to play like Bolt, Snapcaster Bolt in a single turn, and it is very rare that you actually need to do that with white mana, so I like having the additional red sources. So yeah, velocity-based deck. I guess I can talk about why I only have 3 Ancestrals. Basically, like I don't want to get flooded on these, and I feel like if you find them in the early game, like within the first 3 turns, it is still fine. Past that, it's a little awkward, but again, it's a card that you can pitch to Nahiri if you think the game isn't going to go that long. But 4, I found that I just kind of got flooded on them a little bit too much. I want to draw 1 per game, not 2. And with Shardless, I'm kind of coming to the same conclusion where I think I only want 3 Ancestrals. So if this deck had, for example, like this 4th row here, if these were not in the deck, and instead the deck was more spot removal, more counter spells, then I would want the 4th Ancestral, because it would be more likely that I could have Ancestral and a draw with a bunch of interaction. But since I have like these kind of expensive cards, they're a little bit awkward with Ancestral. The Nahiris certainly are awkward, as is the Emrakul. So I'm kind of light on actual interaction, even though the deck is mostly interaction. But yeah, basically, if my cards were all good on their own, then I would probably have 4 Ancestral. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. I hope I'm getting my point across. As for the sideboard, I'm kind of tightening it up, basically narrowing it down to the field that I expect. So I don't have a lot of stuff for small creatures because I have things like Anger and Timely in the main deck, and I'm doing very light sideboarding against them. It's generally just like cutting Ringmans and maybe Mana Leaks as I can. So I have a Helix and Explosives. Sometimes you can board in Spreading Seas, Vendilion Click, maybe Celestial Purge, so like I have a lot of cards that have multiple uses, and you might look at my sideboard and be like, man, like Gerry just has like nothing for Infect or like nothing specific for Zoo. I don't have a lot of targeted hate, but I do have a lot of cards that are just good in a lot of spots. So Celestial Purges for Nahiri and Liliana. Stony Silence is for Tron, Affinity, and there are some other weird decks out there that Stony Silence is good against. I have 2 Vendilion Clicks that used to be Geists, and I think Geist is probably better, but I'm going to try Vendilion Click again because the MGG guys keep winning with it. And this is just a thing that I do like the flash aspect of it. It certainly has that advantage over Geist, but the clock is so much slower. So something like Scapeshift, Tron, like any of these weirdo combo decks, like you want Vendilion Click, both as an additional threat and, in this case, some disruption. I have Jace Bellerin, which I'm pretty excited about. I want to try this card out. I think it is very good in the Snapcaster Lightning Bolt Blue Mirrors, and I like just having an additional Planeswalker. This is like kind of a Geist, basically. A couple Spreading Seas, very, very good against Jund and Abzan, any of those like BGX mid-range decks. Also very good against Tron, very good against Burn. Like if you look at a Burn deck, it's actually comical because they just have like colored mana symbols in all their cards. There are very few cards that are like, 1R or whatever. It's just, a lot of their stuff is RR or RW, and Spreading Seas is effectively just like Stone Rain draw card against them, which is awesome. A couple Negates for combo decks. Dispel is, I would like to have another Dispel against Collected Company decks, especially the Abzan Company decks, because they have Company and Chord. But it's okay. It's okay only having 1 Dispel. I mean, I still have a lot of 2-mana counter spells that I can use like just fine against Collected Company and stuff. I think the second Dispel is basically a luxury. I have a Wear Tear. It's basically just kind of a catch-all. A couple Crumble to Dusts, which are good against Tron and Scapeshift. I would bring in 1 in a mirror match if they showed me a bunch of Celestial Colonnades, but that's about it. Explosives is the cool card in the deck. I like this card a lot just because it's another Anger of the Gods against something like Zoo. But its main focus is actually to just be an answer to random things. Like if you play against Abzan, they might have like a Cage, or they might have Lingering Souls, or people board in all these weird cards to try and stop your Nahiris, and Explosives is just a good general answer to that stuff, while also being good against the rest of their deck to the point where you don't need to board in the Wear Tear. So I like the Explosives a lot, and then the Helix could basically be anything. I want a card for little creatures. I know that I want some additional help against them. It could be an Izzet Staticaster, but Helix also just gives me another life gain spell, so I like that. But yeah, that's the deck. That's the deck tech. Went on kind of long, but I do like this deck a lot, and this is definitely one of the decks that I want to be working on for Modern.